The G7 summit will have to do with just 6 leaders here in Canada today after President Trump's abrupt departure last night.
I look forward to that. The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. Thank you. In Canada, but you probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can. We're going to have dinner with these wonderful leaders, and then I get on the plane. I have to be back early.
The G7 used to be the G8 until Russia was cast out. And now, in Canada, it felt like the G7 might fracture even further. What was meant to be a summit of economic giants quickly unraveled before it began. President Trump's early exit from the summit set the tone. "I have to be back," he said, barely staying long enough to clink a glass at dinner. The event, once hailed as a cornerstone of global cooperation, began without smiles, joint statements, or the usual show of unity. What remained was strategic silence. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, made a bold move. He scrapped the summit's final declaration before discussions even started. The White House had no time to react. What's normally a carefully choreographed performance of diplomacy, the handshakes, photo ops, and press statements, was stripped away, and in its place, a diplomatic vacuum that spoke volumes. This wasn't diplomacy, it was deliberate defiance. Before we go on, tap that like button to help this content reach more viewers and show your support. For the US, this summit was no longer about cooperation. It became a confrontation. President Trump didn't arrive to find common ground. He came demanding compliance, higher defense spending, more tariffs, and threats of economic retaliation. And then came a remark that changed everything. At a campaign rally in Ohio, Trump suggested that Canada should have been part of the United States from the start. In Ottawa, that wasn't brushed off as political theater. It crossed a red line. Carney's response was swift and precise. Cancel the joint communique, delete the photo ops, and deny Trump the optics he craves. According to Bloomberg, Carney's aides described it as a rejection of economic coercion disguised as diplomacy. The aftermath? A summit with no unified stance on climate, trade, or global security. Just a bland summary, a placeholder instead of a proclamation. French President Emmanuel Macron's delegation called it a historic breakdown. A German official termed it tactical silence. But no one, absolutely no one, called it accidental. This marked the first time since 1975 that the host nation refused to validate the summit. The implications are monumental. Carney, once a quiet central banker, is now leading a discreet revolt against American dominance. But the rebellion wasn't limited to words. In a striking move just before the summit, Macron made a surprise visit to Greenland, standing shoulder to shoulder with Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. The message was unmistakable. Greenland is not for sale. This came weeks after Trump had again suggested annexing the territory. Macron's message from the tarmac was clear, global, and personal. Meanwhile, Japan filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization accusing the US of violating international trade laws with its aluminum tariffs. Mexico arrived prepared with legal countermeasures. The UK managed to negotiate a digital trade exemption, but only for a year, and excluding financial services. This wasn't a summit of allies. It was a gathering of nations bracing for impact. Behind closed doors, many pointed the finger squarely at Washington for destabilizing the global economy. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're finding this coverage insightful. Trump's blanket 10% tariff now covers over $1.1 trillion in imports, most from US allies. Canada alone is facing a 22% tariff on dairy, 10% on aluminum, and 14% on lumber. According to Statistics Canada, that's already cost the nation's manufacturing sector more than $4.2 billion in just the first quarter of 2025. The frustration is boiling over. In a closed-door session, Carney flatly refused to tie Canada's federal budget to military spending, directly rejecting Trump's demand that all G7 countries allocate at least 5% of GDP to defense. France and Germany backed him. Even NATO officials called the demand politically unrealistic. With allies pushing back, Trump found himself increasingly alone. But worse than isolation was the collapse of the summit's narrative. No joint closing statement, no press conference, no moment of triumph to display. Just images of a president returning home empty-handed from what used to be the world's most prestigious economic forum. And the consequences? Immediate. The World Bank's June 2025 report cut global GDP growth by 0.7%, blaming trade uncertainty and retaliatory measures, most of them triggered by US policies. The damage was front-page news, not buried in the fine print. Global capital inflows are down 12.4% this quarter, the steepest drop since the early pandemic recovery. In just 90 days, the US has revoked 6 bilateral trade exemptions and imposed tariffs on more than $1.3 trillion in goods. Carney's decision to kill the summit's final communique didn't just deny Trump a victory, it denied him the image he values most: dominance on the global stage. Behind the polished exteriors of alpine resorts and high-security venues, this summit was anything but serene. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz arrived under pressure. German exporters have lost over 17 billion euros in US trade this year. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba faced new tariffs and looming steel investigations. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum came prepared to defend her country's asylum system from US interference and border threats. Then there was India's Narendra Modi, a guest of Canada whose presence cast a shadow over the summit. Modi is under Canadian investigation after reports of state-linked political violence against Sikh activists in Toronto. That investigation clouded every handshake and every side meeting. This wasn't global unity, it was triage. And in refusing to gloss over the dysfunction, Carney may have done what no G7 host has dared to do: admit the G7 no longer functions as intended. Born to stabilize the post-war order and coordinate growth, it now looks more like a stage for confrontation. Under Trump's America First mantra, allies have become targets. And Europe is not sitting quietly. Macron's team, alongside EU diplomats, activated new trade defense mechanisms. If Trump follows through on his 17% tariff on European machinery, retaliation will be automatic. Japan is calling for emergency WTO mediation. Mexico arrived with legal documents in hand. The G7 is no longer about agreement, it's about defense. Carney's silence? It wasn't retreat, it was strategy. No need to chase headlines when you've already framed the picture. One senior Canadian official told Bloomberg, that picture is now global. As of today, every G7 country, except the UK, is subject to US tariffs. Even Britain's narrow exemption expires in March 2026. So the question remains, how long can this model survive? If the host refuses to sign, guests refuse to yield, and everyone else shows up just trying to minimize damage, what's left of the summit's purpose? The remote beauty of the Canadian Rockies was supposed to offer focus and calm. Instead, it served a new strategy: isolation. Roads were closed, protesters held at bay over 50 miles out, and security was airtight. The first total lockdown since the 2002 G8 in Kananaskis. No leaks, no distractions, just a curated silence that left Washington scrambling for a narrative. And that silence worked. While Trump's team tried to shift attention to NATO spending, they were left empty-handed, because without a closing statement, there was no final word to spin. Carney denied Trump his prize, and he did it without raising his voice. This may not be the end of the G7, but it could be the end of the G7 as we know it, because what comes next won't be hashed out in alpine resorts. It'll unfold in NATO meetings, WTO hearings, Arctic patrol routes, energy corridors, and border disputes. Alberta wasn't the summit's finale. It was a flare in the dark. Carney's refusal to fake unity wasn't defiance for show. It was a new doctrine, a declaration that loyalty without principle no longer buys silence. And if this is how the G7 ended, then what's coming next, in NATO and beyond, will make this look like a warm-up. Stay tuned, because the real rupture is still ahead.